Burkina Faso's young president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, didn't just stumble upon corruption. He cracked open one of the darkest secrets in the Sahel. A convoy of trucks, rolling under the banner of humanitarian aid, carried not seeds or fertilizer, but 10 tons of pure amphetamines. Hidden behind logos of international NGOs, this wasn't just about drugs. It was about dirty money, financial laundering, and shadow networks that had operated unchecked for years. And the question that now shook every capital from Paris to Washington was simple. Why did it take a 36-year-old African soldier to expose it? And why now? The discovery of those trucks wasn't just a scandal. It was a window into an empire no one wanted to admit existed. For years, West Africa had been painted as a victim, poor, unstable, always begging for aid. But beneath that narrative, another truth thrived in silence. Vast trafficking routes carved through the desert, invisible kingdoms where billions flowed in drugs, weapons, and blood money. Ibrahim Traoré had grown up hearing rumors of this shadow world. Villagers spoke in hushed tones about men who became rich overnight, about officials who lived like kings while children starved. But rumors are easy to ignore. Evidence, however, trucks full of amphetamines stamped with the logos of international helpers, that was impossible to bury. And yet, as the news broke, an unsettling question rose above the chaos. Who really owned these routes? Were they just criminals? Or was something much bigger, much more powerful, pulling the strings? Long before Ibrahim Traoré wore the uniform of a soldier or the badge of a president, he was just a boy in the dusty streets of his village. And there, he saw things most children should never see. Trucks rumbling past in the dead of night. Men with foreign accents meeting in secret with local officials. Entire fields abandoned, because farmers were told to stay away. At the time, Ibrahim didn't understand. But his best friend, Thomas, the curious one, often whispered, "These aren't just traders. They carry things people aren't allowed to see." The boys would sneak out at night, hiding behind trees, watching the lights disappear into the horizon. One evening, they found strange packages buried in the sand. Sealed, heavy, with markings in languages they didn't even know. The next morning, the packages were gone, just like that. To a child, it felt like mystery. To a young soldier years later, it felt like betrayal. Because Ibrahim realized those ghostly convoys weren't just smuggling drugs. They were smuggling away the very future of Burkina Faso. And somewhere deep inside him, a fire was lit. If he ever had the chance, he would uncover what those men had hidden for decades. Years passed. Ibrahim and Thomas grew older, their boyhood curiosity replaced by the responsibilities of young men. Ibrahim entered the army, disciplined, sharp, already carrying that burning question: who controls the shadows of our land? Then came the day when the first mask slipped. A convoy was intercepted near the border, not by rebels, not by bandits, but by accident, when a military patrol strayed off its usual route. Inside the trucks? Not food, not aid, not supplies for the people, but crates, sealed, guarded, filled with chemicals and tablets worth millions on the black market. When word reached Ibrahim, it was as if his childhood suspicions had come alive. He remembered the nights watching headlights vanish into the desert, the strange packages disappearing without a trace. Now, it was no longer rumor. It was real, undeniable. But the most chilling part wasn't the cargo itself. It was what happened afterward. The convoy drivers were released quietly. The reports vanished. And higher-ranking officials warned soldiers to forget what they saw. Forget? How could Ibrahim forget? This wasn't just about drugs. It was about silence. It was about power so vast it could erase truth with a single command. And for the first time, he realized this network wasn't run by nameless criminals in the dark. It was protected, shielded, maybe even owned by the very people claiming to lead and protect the nation. That night, Ibrahim confided in Thomas. Thomas looked him in the eye and asked, "If they can silence soldiers, who will be left to speak for the people?" It was a question that would haunt Ibrahim, and one day, define his destiny. Ibrahim couldn't let it go. Every soldier was told to move on, to erase the incident from memory. But for him, it was the first piece of a puzzle he had been chasing since boyhood. He started digging, quietly, carefully. Conversations with old traders on the border. Whispers from junior officers who had seen similar shipments vanish without record. Even Thomas, now working in civil service, began collecting fragments from government offices. And slowly, the picture sharpened. Those trucks, they weren't isolated. They were part of a massive chain stretching from the ports of West Africa all the way into Europe and the Middle East. The so-called aid packages carried seals from international organizations. But when traced, the seals led to shell companies in Paris, Dubai, and London. It was a web. Drugs, gold, rare minerals, even weapons, all flowing through African soil, yet none of it for Africans. The deeper Ibrahim looked, the more he realized. This wasn't a local crime. This was architecture, built with precision, maintained with silence, protected by men in uniforms and suits alike. And then came the bitterest revelation. Many of the weapons used by militias to destabilize villages, to terrorize farmers, to keep borders in chaos, had serial numbers that traced back to Western suppliers. The very nations preaching democracy were feeding the very instability that justified their presence. Ibrahim sat in stunned silence as Thomas placed the final piece on the table. "It's not just smugglers, Ibrahim," he whispered. "It's a system. And if we expose it, we'll be fighting more than criminals. We'll be fighting the architects of the modern world order." That night, Ibrahim didn't sleep. He understood something terrifying. The enemy was no longer just within Burkina Faso. The threads stretched across continents, and to challenge them was to declare war on powers far greater than himself. The moment Ibrahim and Thomas pieced the puzzle together, the air around them grew heavier. It was as if unseen eyes were watching, listening. And maybe they were. Strange things began to happen. A motorbike tailing Ibrahim's car at night, never overtaking, never falling back. Anonymous phone calls that ended in silence. Soldiers he trusted suddenly transferred without explanation. One evening, as Ibrahim left the barracks, he found his tires slashed. No valuables stolen, no message left, just a warning, sharp and silent. Thomas was hit harder. He came home to find his office ransacked. Files missing, desk overturned, papers scattered as if someone wanted him to know they'd been there. Nothing of real value was taken, except the documents he'd collected about the foreign companies tied to the shipments. And then came the whispers. Officers approached Ibrahim cautiously, warning him that his name was now circulating in meetings he wasn't invited to. Higher-ups were calling him too curious, but the real test came during a routine mission in the north. Ibrahim's unit was sent to patrol a stretch of land that intelligence reports claimed was quiet. But it wasn't. They walked straight into an ambush. Bullets tore through the air. Several of his men fell before they even knew what was happening. As Ibrahim fought to regain control, the thought struck him like lightning. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had sent him into a trap. That night, as he buried the men he'd lost, Ibrahim's resolve hardened. He understood the cost of truth. The closer he got, the more dangerous it became. But he also understood something else. If powerful men were willing to kill him to keep this buried, then he was finally digging in the right place. In the quiet of Thomas's small apartment, the two men sat facing each other, the night broken only by the hum of an old ceiling fan. On the table between them lay the scattered documents Thomas had managed to save: maps, cargo lists, coded telegrams. Proof, though incomplete, that something far bigger was moving beneath the surface of Burkina Faso. Thomas's hands trembled as he spoke. Ibrahim, they won't stop. You saw what happened to your men. They won't hesitate to bury us alive if it means protecting their gold. Ibrahim leaned forward, his eyes burning with that unshakable fire Thomas had known since they were boys. And if we stay silent, Thomas? If we do nothing? Then the people remain slaves in their own land, while others eat from their soil. Is that the life we fought for? The room fell into silence. It was the kind of silence that demands an answer. Thomas lowered his gaze. Fear had carved deep lines into his face. He had seen families destroyed, men disappear overnight, dreams crushed beneath boots of power. To speak out would mean exile at best, death at worst. But to stay silent meant betraying every child who still carried water from dry wells, every mother who buried her son while foreigners grew rich. Finally, Thomas looked up, his voice steady now. If we do this, Ibrahim, there's no turning back. We can't just scratch at the surface. We have to tear the veil off completely. A faint smile curved across Ibrahim's lips. Not of arrogance, but of destiny. Then let the fire spread, Thomas. If silence is safety, I choose danger. Because our silence is their weapon, and our voice will be the people's shield. At that moment, their paths were sealed. No more hesitation. No more hiding. Ibrahim and Thomas would step into the storm, not because they wanted glory, but because someone had to hold the line. The sun had barely crested the Sahel horizon when Captain Ibrahim Traoré moved. Every detail mattered. The convoy's route, the thermal signatures, the fake NGO logos, they had been studied, cross-referenced, and now every anomaly was a weapon. At the Sahel Regional Command in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim's team monitored screens glowing with satellite feeds, drone paths, and encrypted communications. Every second ticked like a bomb. One wrong move could trigger a massacre or allow the traffickers to vanish into the desert dust forever. Position units at checkpoint 7 and 11, Ibrahim ordered. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it crushed any hesitation. Intercept only when the lead truck crosses the Burkina Faso border. Timing is everything. Outside, unmarked trucks rolled through the dark, their drivers unaware they were being watched, analyzed, and traced. Thermal scanners highlighted cargo heat spikes that should have been impossible for ordinary seed shipments. Drones circled above, silent and invisible, sending back live overlays to the command room. Meanwhile, Thomas coordinated communications, linking local operatives with Ghanaian cyber analysts. Every port of entry, every abandoned checkpoint, every safe zone for smugglers was under digital scrutiny. They were mapping years of trafficking patterns into a single, actionable blueprint. Hours passed. The convoy crossed the border, and Ibrahim gave the order that would echo across West Africa. Engage Operation Sahara Phase 7. Lock down northern border. No exceptions. In an instant, roads were sealed. Checkpoints manned. Airspace scanned. Trucks stalled, drivers confused, their confidence evaporating under the weight of unseen eyes. This was no random raid. It was a statement. A young African officer had just told the world that his land, his people, would not be pawns anymore. As the lead vehicles stopped, Ibrahim didn't hesitate. Extraction teams moved with precision, opening containers with cryo cutters to reveal what had been hidden beneath mineral bags. 10 tons of crystal clear amphetamines. A shipment that would have flooded Europe's streets with death, stopped cold by one man and his unwavering team. Thomas exhaled, barely believing what they had accomplished. We did it. But they'll retaliate. Hard, Ibrahim nodded, eyes on the monitors. Then we prepare for what comes next. This is only the beginning. If we show weakness now, the whole system reboots itself. But if we stand firm. He let the sentence hang, a challenge to every corrupt hand reaching into Burkina Faso. In the desert heat, the first strike had been made. And for the first time in decades, Africa's sovereignty had a visible defender. The seizure sent shockwaves far beyond Burkina Faso. Within minutes, encrypted alerts pinged security desks in Paris, Brussels, and Berlin. Calls from EU diplomats, silent warnings from UN monitors, and urgent pings from French intelligence filled the communication lines. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't answer. He had a mission, and nothing would divert it.
Back in Ouagadougou, the command room was a hive of controlled chaos. Analysts sifted through manifests, drone footage, and satellite overlays, confirming what the extraction had revealed. 10,000 kilos of synthetic amphetamines, hidden beneath bags labeled for agricultural aid. Each container was a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle pointing to years of exploitation, loopholes, and systemic corruption masked as humanitarian work. Meanwhile, Thomas coordinated with local forensic teams and Ghanaian cyber experts, tracing shipping QR codes, financial flows, and historical convoy data. Patterns emerged, routes repeated over years, documents manipulated, and international NAS logos misused as shields. Every detail pointed to a well-oiled network operating in plain sight. They've been using the aid system as a cover for years, Thomas said, voice tight with disbelief. And no one noticed until now. Ibrahim's gaze was steady, eyes fixed on the live feed of the immobilized trucks. Then we make them notice, he said. Within hours, the news broke globally. Headlines screamed, Burkina Faso seizes EU relief shipment and humanitarian aid or drug cartel front. Western media framed it as an overreaction, while African journalists celebrated a rare victory for sovereignty. Social media erupted, youth in Lagos, Accra, Bamako, and Nairobi stitched drone footage and press clips into montages, sharing the story like wildfire. Hashtags like #AidExposed and #AfricanSovereignty began trending across the continent. Yet the political pressure mounted. European diplomats demanded explanations. NGOs issued statements claiming misinterpretation. Interpol lauded the operation, but maintained a cautious diplomatic tone. But Ibrahim Traoré remained unflinching. This is not a clerical error, he declared during a secure press briefing. This is systemic manipulation, and we will expose it. By the end of the day, Burkina Faso had not just stopped a shipment, it had rewritten the rules of engagement. African nations watched closely, some offering support, others calculating their next move. The world had seen a young African captain, acting decisively, challenging decades of invisible control. And for Ibrahim and Thomas, the operation had only just begun. The first strike had been successful, but the real battle, for transparency, for accountability, and for Africa's sovereignty was only unfolding. While headlines raged across continents, Ibrahim Traoré knew the seizure was only the beginning. The trucks had been stopped, but the network behind them ran deep, invisible, and well protected. He turned to the digital battlefield. Thomas and the cyber team worked tirelessly in Ouagadougou, tracing QR codes, shipping manifests, and satellite timestamps. Every container scan, every route analyzed revealed an unsettling pattern. Convoys using old petroleum lines, abandoned aid corridors, and demilitarized zones. These weren't random mistakes, they were calculated moves, refined over years, exploiting diplomatic loopholes and soft oversight. Each intercepted shipment had links to a European shell company disguised as an NGO. Financial transactions flowed through multiple banks in Luxembourg, Basel, and Malta. Shipping labels claimed agricultural aid or experimental biogenic samples, yet beneath these covers, synthetic amphetamines moved undetected. AI-driven simulations compared years of NGO logistics with recent convoy movements. 3 previous convoys matched 89% of the same route. None had declared accurate manifests. None had ever been intercepted, until now. They thought they were untouchable, Thomas muttered, reviewing overlay maps of satellite heat signatures and drone surveillance paths. They relied on centuries of soft power to move undisturbed. Ibrahim's eyes narrowed. For months, he had rebuilt West Africa's intelligence capabilities, combining local engineers, Ghanaian cyber forensics experts, and upgraded adaptive AI systems. Now, the technology was paying off. Within hours, the entire suspected route was digitally reconstructed. Every unscheduled stop, every delay, every checkpoint bypass was mapped. The revelation was chilling. These weren't just traffickers. They were a shadow network operating under the guise of development, legally insulated and diplomatically shielded. And now, for the first time, Burkina Faso could see the full picture. This ends now, Ibrahim said, voice firm. We expose it all. No more hidden lanes, no more invisible corridors. Every shipment, every route, every document, we uncover it. Across the continent, African nations watch closely. For the first time, the story wasn't about foreign intervention, it was about African initiative, African intelligence, and African sovereignty. And the digital trail, once hidden in plain sight, had just been lit up for the world to see. The digital trail led to a revelation no one in West Africa or Europe was prepared for. Every shipment, every route, every document was connected to a shadow network hiding beneath the facade of international aid. And now, for the first time, the full scale of the operation was visible. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't just want to seize drugs, he wanted accountability. At 10:17 a.m., he authorized the release of key documentation to open-source channels. Shipping manifests, corporate registrations, QR code traces, all verified and accessible. Independent journalists across Africa began analyzing the data. In Nairobi, Accra, and Johannesburg, transparency platforms confirmed the authenticity. The reaction was immediate. European policy desks scrambled. Brussels, Paris, Luxembourg, all lit up with emergency calls and urgent internal meetings. NGOs and shell companies once thought untouchable were now under scrutiny. Diplomatic calls poured in, some calm, others thinly veiled threats. But Traoré remained unshaken. This isn't about overreaction, he stated firmly in a televised briefing. This is systemic abuse hidden under the language of aid. Africa will no longer be a blind spot. Across the Sahel, national leaders watched in awe. Ghana's president, Algeria's foreign office, and Chad's security chiefs publicly endorsed the investigation. A joint regional task force was formed to audit all incoming aid shipments, an unprecedented move to reclaim sovereignty. Meanwhile, the forensic teams discovered the depth of the deception. Unregistered drones, false shipping codes, chemical precursors mislabeled as agricultural supplies. Entire logistics networks, spanning multiple countries, were operating above the law, or so they thought. They underestimated us, Thomas whispered to Traoré as the team cross-referenced satellite logs with AI-predicted convoy patterns. Every false label, every loophole, they all lead straight back to their boardrooms. Ibrahim Traoré, young, relentless, and fearless, had not only stopped 10 tons of synthetic drugs, but had exposed the invisible corridors of exploitation. Africa was no longer waiting for permission. The message was clear. Anyone using this continent as a backdoor for profit would now face consequences. And as news spread across social media, the hashtag #AidExposed erupted. Youth stitched footage of intercepted convoys, satellite scans, and Traoré's statements into viral montages. Public opinion in Europe shifted rapidly, forcing governments to respond. Transparency was no longer optional. For the first time in decades, the world saw a nation standing unflinching, a young captain refusing secrecy, and a continent beginning to reclaim its narrative. Within hours of the exposure, the Sahel region buzzed with unprecedented activity. President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana publicly affirmed Burkina Faso's sovereign right to inspect and secure its borders. Algeria and Chad dispatched legal and technical teams to assist in auditing historical aid shipments. Even Nigeria convened an emergency security caucus to assess the scope of systemic exploitation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just fighting one shipment, he had sparked a regional awakening. Operation Sahara Sans Drogue was formally launched. 11 key border points across the Sahel were upgraded with high-resolution scanning posts, capable of detecting concealed chemicals, drones, and falsified cargo. Mobile adaptive scanners allowed teams to intercept suspicious shipments in real time, no matter the claimed origin or aid organization logo. Local customs officers, once resigned to routine inspections, now received specialized tactical training. Agricultural experts were embedded in cargo inspection teams to verify claimed seed aid. Laboratories were set up in Goram Goram and Diapaga to test unknown substances within 90 minutes of seizure, sharing results instantly with regional partners. Even AI and digital surveillance were mobilized on a continental scale. Satellite uplinks from Niger, drone logistics from Mauritania, and software integration from South Africa created a coordinated digital firewall against shadow networks. No corridor would remain blind. Every shipment, every truck, every label would now face scrutiny. One intercepted convoy from Djibouti revealed synthetic methylamine labeled as anti-pest liquid for reforestation projects. Its purity exceeded European industrial standards. How many previous shipments had gone undetected? How many lives have been quietly put at risk while the world ignored these corridors? Captain Traor's declaration echoed across the continent. We don't just need freedom. We need a clean space for our children to breathe. His words weren't rhetoric. They were a blueprint for systemic reform. The African Union, inspired by Burkina Faso's example, launched a working group on sub-Saharan customs integrity. Collaborative agreements were signed to harmonize GPS tracking, AI-assisted cargo analysis, and cross-border intelligence sharing. For the first time, African nations were acting collectively to reclaim control over their own borders and supply chains. Burkina Faso, once overlooked and underestimated, had become the epicenter of a continental reset. The fight wasn't over, but the course had changed irreversibly. Sovereignty, transparency, and accountability were no longer optional. They were operational doctrine. And at the heart of it all stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young, relentless, and unwavering, lighting a path that could no longer be ignored. By the morning after the seizure, the world had its eyes on Burkina Faso. Headlines erupted. EU aid shipment seized. Humanitarian crisis or diplomatic breach. Western media painted conflicting narratives. Some called it an overreaction. Others labeled it a procedural misstep. Few mentioned the 10 tons of high-purity synthetic amphetamines hidden beneath aid. Social media erupted. Hashtags like #AidExpoZedregroutes and #AfricanSovereignty trended across Lagos, Accra, Bamako, and Nairobi. Young activists stitched Captain Traor's brief, powerful statements into montages with subtitles and protest banners. Video clips went viral in hours, spreading the story far beyond traditional news outlets. And at the center of it all stood one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young, relentless, and unafraid to confront not just traffickers, but entrenched international systems. The world watched, debated, and whether they admitted it or not, began to take notice. The seizure didn't just make headlines, it forced action. Within days, a summit of ECOWAS interior ministers convened in Accra. Leaders from Nigeria, Ghana, Algeria, Chad, and Burkina Faso discussed a bold initiative called a 3ET Clean Transit, a continent-wide program to track and secure every cargo crossing West African borders. Nigeria pledged emergency security coordination. Chad and Algeria sent legal teams to assist Burkina Faso in reviewing historical shipments. Drone logistics from Mauritania, satellite uplinks from Niger, and AI-powered monitoring tools from South Africa were deployed. For the first time, West Africa wasn't waiting for foreign oversight. It was building its own intelligence infrastructure. Customs officers were trained in tactical inspection. Agricultural experts were embedded in every checkpoint to verify aid shipments. Labs in Goram Goram and Diapaga were set up to test unknown compounds within 90 minutes. Every result was shared in real time with partner nations. One intercepted shipment from Djibouti, labeled as a reforestation agent, contained high-purity synthetic methylamine, the same substance traffickers had tried to disguise under humanitarian logos for years. The implications were staggering. Narcotics networks had exploited development aid for decades. The continent had been a blind spot. Now, policies, protocols, and monitoring systems were being rewritten. For the first time, Africa was taking control of its corridors, reclaiming sovereignty, and refusing to be a logistical playground for external interests. In his televised address, Captain Ibrahim Traoré summarized it simply: We don't just need freedom. We need a clean space for our children to breathe. His words weren't just metaphor. They became administrative doctrine. Across West Africa, governments, civil society, and youth movements began rallying behind the principle. No more blind trust. No more unchecked corridors. Africa would defend its soil. Burkina Faso's story now traveled differently. No longer a footnote in security reports, it became a benchmark, a case study, a mirror reflecting decades of neglect. For generations, the world had told Africa it couldn't protect itself, that it was too divided, too under-resourced, too dependent. But on that decisive day, everything changed. 10 tons of methamphetamine had been stopped, not by American boots, not by European oversight, but by a young officer under the scorched flag of Burkina Faso. No borrowed uniforms, no foreign command, just one son of the soil standing in defiance. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't waste time with grand speeches. He acted with precision, nerve, and the quiet rage of someone who had endured enough. I don't care what they call me, he had said once. I care that our children live long enough to be called anything at all. And now, that wasn't just words, it was a promise in action. The corridors that had once funneled illicit substances under the guise of aid were now under watchful eyes. Customs, intelligence, drones, AI systems, all aligned with one purpose: to protect the land and its people. Every shipment would be inspected, every route monitored, every loophole closed. The message was clear. Africa would no longer be used as a backdoor, a blind spot for global interests. Captain Traoré wasn't a savior. He wasn't seeking praise. He was simply a child of Africa standing where many flinched, lighting a flare that could not be unseen. And for the first time, the continent began to see itself not as a passive observer, but as an active defender of its own destiny. This was not the end of the battle, but something irreversible had shifted. Burkina Faso, once overlooked and underestimated, had become the center of the map. The streets, once surrendered to traffickers disguised as aid workers, were now watched, monitored, and defended. Africa was no longer waiting to be rescued. It was taking control. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's actions were about more than just a seizure. They were about dignity, about refusing to be used and manipulated under the guise of foreign aid. He didn't claim to be a hero. He was simply a son of the soil, standing firm where others had flinched, challenging decades of buried duplicity and silent complicity. Across West Africa, governments began to take notice. New surveillance posts were erected, AI-driven inspection protocols were deployed, and regional cooperation became not just a discussion, but a mandate. The corridors of power that had long exploited the continent's blind spots now faced scrutiny like never before. The world watched, some in disbelief, others in admiration. And the message was unmistakable. Africa's sovereignty is not negotiable. Its future is not a commodity. Captain Traoré lit a flare that could not be ignored, signaling to young men and women, to mothers and grandmothers, that change was possible. If you believe in the courage to stand against systemic corruption, in the power of one person to ignite a movement, write Africa Rise in the comments. Share this story. Let it echo from the streets of Ouagadougou to the halls of international policy. This isn't just a victory over drugs, it's a victory for self-determination, for transparency, and for the Africa that refuses to be silenced any longer.